Hi everyone. I'm going to share a story that completely changed my life and destroyed my family as I knew it. For 23 years, I lived in the shadow of my older brother Marcus, watching my parents worship the ground he walked on while treating me like I was invisible. They believed every lie he told, defended every horrible thing he did, turned a blind eye to the abuse I suffered at his hands. But what they didn't know was that I was documenting everything. Every bruise, every threat, every moment of psychological torture. And when I finally revealed the truth, it didn't just expose Marcus for who he really was, brought down the entire facade my family had built around him. This is the story of how I went from being the forgotten son to the one who held all the power, and how one USB drive changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dylan Carter, and I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in what everyone thought was the perfect American family. My father, Michael Carter, was a successful financial advisor, and my mother, Jennifer, was a hospital administrator. From the outside, we had everything: the big house in the suburbs, the white picket fence, the family vacations to Yellowstone every summer. But inside that house, there was a hierarchy that was established long before I was born. Marcus was the golden child, 4 years older than me, and from the moment I could walk, I understood that I would always come second. He was the star quarterback, the strata student, the one who could charm anyone within 5 minutes of meeting them. I was just Dylan, the quiet one, the one who played video games in his room, and the one who somehow always seemed to disappoint. The abuse started small when I was around 7 years old. Marcus would accidentally push me down the stairs when our parents weren't looking, or he'd hide my homework so I'd get in trouble at school. When I tried to tell my parents, they'd dismiss it as typical sibling rivalry. Boys will be boys. My mother would say with a laugh, "Marcus is just being a big brother." But it wasn't typical, and it wasn't harmless. As we got older, Marcus became more creative, more psychological in his torture. He'd wait until our parents left for work, then spend hours telling me how worthless I was, how I was adopted, how everyone would be happier if I just disappeared. He'd steal money from my room and then tell my parents I was lying when I reported it missing. He'd break my gaming console and convince them I was just being careless. The physical abuse escalated as Marcus got stronger. He'd punch me in the stomach where bruises wouldn't show, or twist my arm behind my back until I thought it would break. He'd hold me underwater in the pool during play fighting until I was gasping for air. When I'd surface, choking and terrified, he'd laugh and tell our parents I was being dramatic. The worst part wasn't even the abuse itself. It was watching my parents' faces light up every time Marcus walked into a room while barely acknowledging my existence. When Marcus made varsity football as a sophomore, my dad took him out for a steak dinner and bought him a new truck. When I made the honor roll that same semester, my mom said, "That's nice, sweetie," without looking up from her magazine buy. The time I was in high school, I had accepted that this was just how things were. Marcus was destined for greatness, and I was destined to be invisible. He was heading to University of Washington on a full scholarship, and I was just trying to survive until I could escape to college anywhere that would take me. The psychological warfare was relentless. Marcus would invite friends over and make jokes about me in front of them, calling me the family disappointment or telling embarrassing stories about times I'd wet the bed as a child. When I'd get upset, he'd tell our parents I was being too sensitive and couldn't take a joke. He had a particular talent for making the abuse look accidental or playful to outside observers. He'd throw a football at my head to test my reflexes or tackle me so hard during backyard games that I'd see stars. When I'd complain, he'd say we were just roughhousing and that I needed to toughen up. Everything changed during my junior year of high school. I had started working part-time at a local electronics store to save money for college. Since I knew my parents wouldn't help me the way they'd helped Marcus, one day, my manager, an older man named Frank, noticed bruises on my arms that I'd tried to cover with long sleeves. "Kid," he said quietly, pulling me aside during my break, "those don't look like they came from sports." I tried to laugh it off, but Frank wasn't buying it. He told me about his own experience with an abusive older brother and how he'd learned to protect himself by keeping records. If you're not ready to speak up now, that's okay, he said. But start documenting everything. Photos, dates, witnesses. You never know when you might need them. That conversation planted a seed in my mind. I went home that night and really looked at myself in the mirror for the first time in years. I had finger-shaped bruises on my upper arms from where Marcus had grabbed me too hard 2 days earlier. I had a black eye that I'd told everyone came from basketball practice, but really came from Marcus accidentally elbowing me in the face during dinner. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to start documenting Marcus's behavior, not because I had any grand plan, but because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening to me was real. I started with a simple notebook, hidden in my bedroom closet. Behind my old comic books, I wrote down dates, times, what Marcus had done or said. I took photos of bruises with an old digital camera I'd gotten for Christmas years earlier. I saved text messages where Marcus threatened me or called me names. I even started recording conversations on my phone when I could do it safely. At first, it was just for my own sanity. But as the evidence piled up, I realized I was building something much more powerful than a personal journal. I was creating an undeniable record of who Marcus really was behind closed doors. The abuse escalated during my senior year. Marcus stressed about college applications and football recruitment, and he took it out on me more frequently. But now, instead of just enduring it, I was documenting every incident. When he threw a textbook at my head during an argument about the TV remote, I photographed the bruise and wrote down exactly what he'd said. When he cornered me in the garage and threatened to beat the loser out of me if I ever embarrassed him in front of his friends, I had my phone recording in my pocket. Marcus had also developed a twisted game where he'd challenged me to wrestling, matches that were really just excuses to hurt me. He'd pin me down and apply pressure to my joints until I was screaming, then let up just before our parents came to investigate. Dylan's just being a baby, he'd tell them when they asked about. The noise, my parents remained completely oblivious. They were too busy celebrating Marcus's acceptance to UW and his selection as team captain to notice that their younger son was living in fear in his own home. When I tried to bring up Marcus's behavior, they'd shut me down immediately. "We don't have time for your jealousy right now, Dylan," my father would say. "Can't you just be happy for your brother?" The incident that changed everything happened 3 weeks before my high school graduation. Marcus had been accepted to University of Washington, and my parents were throwing him a celebration party. The entire extended family was coming, plus half the neighborhood I was expected to help set up, serve food, basically be invisible while everyone fawned over the golden boy. I had been accepted to Washington State University with a partial scholarship, but my parents had barely acknowledged it. All their attention was on Marcus and his full ride to UW. I was bitter, exhausted, and honestly just counting down the days until I could leave for college, the night before the party. I was in the kitchen preparing appetizers when Marcus came in, already drunk from pre-gaming with his friends. He started making fun of my appearance, calling me scrawny and saying that I was going to embarrass the family at his party. When I ignored him and kept working, he got angry. "Don't you dare ignore me," he said, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're going to smile tomorrow and pretend to be the perfect little brother, or I'm going to make your life hell." I tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. "You know what? I'm tired of you acting like you matter. Maybe it's time people know what a pathetic loser you really are." That's when he told me his plan. He was going to tell everyone at the party that I'd been stealing money from our parents, that I'd been caught cheating at school, that I was basically a disappointment and a failure. He'd been building up to this for months, planting little seeds of doubt about my character whenever he got the chance. "Mom and Dad will believe every word," he said with a smile that made my blood run cold. "They always do. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if they let you go to community college." But what Marcus didn't know was that I had been recording our conversation. I had gotten into the habit of turning on my phone's voice recorder whenever I was alone with him. This time I had captured everything: the threats, the plan to destroy my reputation, even the sound of him physically grabbing me as I stood there in the kitchen. Listening to him outline exactly how he was going to humiliate me in front of our entire family, I realized something. I wasn't the powerless little boy I had been for so many years. I had evidence. I had proof. And I had a choice to make. I could let Marcus destroy me at his party, or I could finally fight back. The next morning, Marcus cornered me again, this time in the basement while I was getting folding chairs for the party. He shoved me against the concrete wall and got in my face. "Remember what we talked about last night?" he said, his breath reeking of alcohol. "You say one word against me today and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life." To emphasize his point, he punched me in the ribs, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to make breathing painful for the rest of the day. It was a calculated move, designed to remind me of my place without leaving visible evidence. But Marcus had miscalculated. I had been recording that conversation too. The party was everything my parents had hoped for. The backyard was decorated with University of Washington colors. There was a catered buffet, and Marcus was holding court. In the center of it all, charming relatives and family friends with stories about his future plans. I played my part perfectly, smiling, helping with setup, staying in the background like the good little brother I was supposed to be, but I was also preparing. Earlier that morning, I had transferred all my evidence photos, recordings, text, messages, my detailed journal entries onto a USB drive. I had also made copies and stored them in multiple locations, including emailing them to myself. I wasn't going to let Marcus gaslight me or claim I had fabricated anything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Around 8 o'clock, Marcus gathered everyone in the living room for what he called a family announcement. My parents were beaming with pride, probably expecting him to share more good news about UW or his future plans. Instead, he launched into his character assassination of me. "Before I leave for college," he said, putting on his most sincere voice, "I think it's important that everyone knows the truth about what's been happening in our family. I hate to say this, but my brother Dylan has been struggling with some serious issues." He went on to detail every lie he had planned, the supposed theft, the alleged cheating, the fictional behavioral problems. My parents' faces went from confusion to disappointment to anger as they looked at me. Our relatives and family friends shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to react to this unexpected drama. "I've tried to protect him," Marcus continued, "but I can't keep covering for him anymore. He needs help, and maybe being exposed like this will finally get him the intervention he needs." The room was silent except for the sound of my mother crying. My father looked at me with disgust, and I could see him preparing to deliver one of his famous lectures about responsibility and consequences. But then I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I think everyone should know the truth, but not Marcus's version of it." I pulled out the USB drive and walked over to the laptop that was still connected to the TV from Marcus's earlier slideshow presentation. My hands were shaking, but I managed to plug it in and navigate to the first file. "This is a recording from last night," I announced to the room. "I think you should all hear what Marcus really thinks about this family." I played the recording from the kitchen, Marcus's threats, his plan to destroy my reputation, his admission that he knew our parents would believe anything he said. The room was dead silent as his voice filled the space, cold and calculating in a way that no one had ever heard before. My mother's crying stopped abruptly. My father's face went pale. Marcus started to protest, claiming the recording was fake, that I had somehow manipulated it, but I was already opening the next file. "This is from 3 months ago," I said, playing another recording where Marcus detailed exactly how he planned to sabotage my college applications. "And this is from last Christmas." One by one, I played the recordings, showed the photos, read excerpts from my journal entries. Years of abuse, manipulation, and psychological torture laid bare in front of everyone who had ever thought Marcus was perfect. The most damning piece of evidence was a video I had secretly recorded 6 months earlier. Marcus had been angry about something I couldn't even remember what, and he had cornered me in the basement laundry room. In the video, you could see him grabbing me, shoving me against the wall, threatening to beat the weakness out of me if I ever crossed him again. "You're a psychopath," I said to Marcus as the video played. "And everyone in this room has been enabling you my entire life."
Ow.
The party ended in chaos. Half the guests left immediately, too uncomfortable to stay and witness the destruction of what they had thought was the perfect family. The other half stayed to watch the drama unfold, though they probably wished they hadn't. Marcus tried everything he could think of to discredit the evidence, claimed I had edited the recordings, that I had manipulated the photos, that I was having some kind of mental breakdown and making everything up. But there was too much evidence spanning too many years for any of his explanations to make sense. What really sealed his fate was when my cousin Jake spoke up. Jake had been quiet throughout the whole revelation, but suddenly he stood up and said, "Actually, I remember some of this stuff. I saw Marcus hurt Dylan during family gatherings when we were kids, and when I asked him about it, he told me Dylan was just clumsy. But now, I don't think Dylan was clumsy at all." Then my Uncle Tom chimed in. "I always wondered why Dylan seemed so afraid whenever Marcus was around. I thought he was just intimidated by his big brother's success. But now it makes sense." One by one, family members started sharing their own observations, things they had noticed but dismissed at the time. My parents' reactions were almost as devastating as the abuse itself. My mother locked herself in her bedroom and refused to come out for 3 days. My father initially tried to defend Marcus, suggesting that maybe he had been under too much pressure and that the abuse was just rough play. That had gotten out of hand. But when I played the recording of Marcus planning to destroy my reputation, at the party, something in my father's face changed. He realized that his golden boy wasn't just physically abusive. He was a calculating manipulator who had been playing the entire family for years. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since I was 7 years old," I replied. "And you never once believed me when I tried to tell you." The confrontation with Marcus was unlike anything I had ever experienced. When he realized that his denials weren't working, he completely dropped his charming facade and showed everyone exactly who he really was. He screamed at me, called me every name in the book, and actually tried to physically attack me before my father stepped in. "You've ruined everything," he yelled as my father held him back. "I worked so hard to build this life, and you've destroyed it with your lies." "They're not lies," I said calmly. "They're the truth, and everyone can see it now." But Marcus wasn't done. In his rage, he made a mistake that would haunt him forever. He started admitting to things that weren't even in my evidence, trying to justify his behavior by explaining how weak I had been as a child. "You don't understand," he said to my father. "He was always whining, always crying about nothing. I was just trying to toughen him up. That time I locked him in the shed overnight when he was 10. He needed to learn not to be such a baby." The room went dead silent. I hadn't included that incident in my evidence because I had been too traumatized to document it properly at the time. But Marcus had just confessed to it in front of 30 people. My grandfather, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly stood up. He was 82 years old and commanded respect from everyone in the family. "Marcus Carter," he said in a voice that could cut glass, "you are no grandson of mine. Get out of this house right now." The consequences for Marcus were swift and severe. Word spread quickly through our community about what had happened at the party. Several people who had been there posted about it on social media, and soon everyone in town knew that the Carter family's perfect son was actually an abuser, but the real damage came from an unexpected source. My high school guidance counselor, Mr. Rodriguez, had been at the party as a family friend. He had heard everything, and he was mandated to report suspected abuse to the authorities. Even though I was 18 and legally an adult, he was required to file a report about the historical abuse of a minor. This triggered a formal investigation. Child Protective Services couldn't do anything about the past abuse, but they interviewed me extensively and documented everything. More importantly, they flagged Marcus in their system as a potential risk to other children. The University of Washington was contacted by someone who had been at the party. They launched an investigation. While they couldn't revoke his admission based on family drama alone, they did interview several of his high school classmates who came forward with stories of Marcus's bullying behavior at school. Combined with the evidence I had provided, it painted a picture of a young man with serious anger management and manipulation issues. The final blow came when Marcus's girlfriend, Stephanie, broke up with him publicly. She posted on social media that she had experienced emotional abuse from Marcus throughout their relationship, that seeing the evidence I had presented made her realize she wasn't crazy for feeling afraid of him. I always thought I was overreacting when he would get jealous and controlling, she wrote. But after seeing Dylan's evidence, I understand that this is who he really is. I'm done making excuses for him. University of Washington ultimately decided to revoke his scholarship, though they allowed him to keep his admission if he could pay full tuition and complete anger management counseling. My parents couldn't afford the full tuition, especially after my father's financial firm started losing clients due to the scandal. The professional consequences for my parents were severe. My mother, being a hospital administrator, faced scrutiny from the board about her ability to identify and protect patients from abuse when she had failed to protect her own son. She was placed on administrative leave while they conducted their own investigation. My father's financial firm, which specialized in family wealth management, lost several major clients who didn't want to be associated with someone who had enabled child abuse in his own home. He was forced to take a significant pay cut and eventually had to leave the firm to work as an independent advisor. Marcus ended up attending Seattle Community College, and my parents insisted he move out of the house. They couldn't afford to support him, and honestly, I think they were afraid of what he might do if he stayed. He moved into a small apartment across town and got a job at a warehouse. What I didn't expect was how the exposure would lead to other people coming forward with their own stories about Marcus. Within a week of the party, I received messages from 3 different guys who had been teammates with Marcus in high school. Each of them described similar patterns of bullying, intimidation, and psychological abuse. Trevor Banks, who had been on the JV football team when Marcus was varsity captain, sent me a long email detailing how Marcus had systematically bullied younger players. He would make us do extra laps until we puked, Trevor wrote. And if anyone complained, he'd make their life hell during practice. I always thought it was just hazing, but seeing your evidence made me realize it was abuse. Another teammate, Kevin Walsh, told me about how Marcus had convinced him to skip classes to help with team bonding activities, then used Kevin's declining grades as evidence that he was too stupid for college. When Kevin tried to refocus on his studies, Marcus would organize the team to ostracize him until he fell back in line. The most shocking revelation came from our former neighbor, Patterson. He had lived next door to us for 15 years and had watched Marcus and me grow up. 3 days after the party, he knocked on our door and asked to speak with me privately. I should have said something years ago, he told me, tears in his eyes. I saw things, Dylan. I heard things. But your parents seemed so happy with Marcus, and I didn't want to interfere in family business. Mr. Patterson revealed that he had witnessed Marcus's abuse multiple times over the years. He had seen Marcus push me off my bike when I was 9, causing me to scrape my knees and elbows badly. He had heard him screaming at me through the thin walls of our houses, calling me names that made him sick to his stomach. He had even seen Marcus throw rocks at me when I was playing in the backyard alone. The worst thing I saw, he said, was when you were about 12, Marcus locked you in the tool shed in the middle of winter. You were crying and banging on the door, and he was inside the house laughing. I almost called the police, but then your parents came home and let you out. I convinced myself that it was just a prank between brothers. Learning about all these witnesses who had stayed silent for years was both validating and heartbreaking. It proved that the abuse had been visible to others, but it also showed how easily people could look the other way. When they didn't want to get involved, the most significant new evidence came from an unexpected source: Marcus himself. About 2 weeks after the party, when the initial shock had worn off and reality was setting in, Marcus tried to rebuild his reputation by controlling the narrative. He started telling people that I had exaggerated everything, that I was mentally unstable, that the family was just going through a rough patch. But he made a crucial mistake. He sent a series of text messages to his best friend Connor explaining his version of events. Connor, who had been at the party and seen the evidence, was disturbed by Marcus's complete lack of remorse and his attempts to manipulate the situation even further in the texts. Marcus wrote, "I need you to back me up and tell people that Dylan has always been weak. He's jealous because I'm successful, and he's not. Yeah, I was rough on him sometimes, but that's what big brothers do." He's making it sound way worse than it was. Connor screenshotted the messages and sent them to me. But the most damning text was the last one. The only thing I regret is not being more careful. Should have known he was recording everything. I'm going to have to be smarter about this kind of stuff in the future. That message was a smoking gun. It wasn't just an admission of guilt, it was a statement of intent to continue manipulative behavior, just more carefully. When I shared this with my parents, it was the final nail in the coffin of their relationship with Marcus. The ripple effects continued to spread. Marcus's former football coach, who had been one of his biggest supporters, reached out to me after hearing about the situation. He admitted that he had noticed Marcus's aggressive behavior toward younger players but had dismissed it as competitive leadership. I should have recognized the signs, Coach Williams told me. Marcus was always too rough during practice, always finding ways to humiliate the younger kids. I told myself it was just team building, but now I see it was bullying. The coach's admission led to a review of Marcus's behavior during his high school football career. Several younger players came forward with stories of hazing and abuse that Marcus had orchestrated. The school district launched an investigation into the football program's culture, and Coach Williams was eventually forced to resign, as more people came forward. A pattern emerged that went far beyond sibling rivalry. Marcus had been systematically abusing his power and authority over anyone he perceived as weaker than himself. I wasn't his only victim, I was just the one who had finally gathered enough evidence to expose him. The legal implications became more serious when the district attorney's office reviewed the evidence. While they couldn't prosecute Marcus for the historical abuse of me due to statute of limitations issues, they were able to build a case around his threats and intimidation tactics, which had continued into his adult years. The text messages to Connor, combined with testimony from his former teammates and evidence of ongoing harassment, resulted in Marcus being charged with stalking and criminal harassment. He was ordered to attend anger management classes and placed on probation for 2 years. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Marcus's carefully constructed image completely crumbled at his community college. Word had spread about his past, and his classmates and professors treated him with suspicion and disgust. He couldn't charm his way out of this situation because too many people knew the truth. He was forced to transfer to a different school in another city. But even there, his reputation followed him. In the age of social media, it's nearly impossible to completely escape your past, especially when that past involves documented abuse and manipulation. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Marcus's own therapist, while doctor-patient privilege prevented her from sharing details of their sessions. She did contact me to say that Marcus had been court-ordered to undergo psychological evaluation as part of his probation. She couldn't tell me the results. Did say that she was recommending that Marcus be flagged in several databases as a potential risk to intimate partners and children. This meant that if he ever applied for jobs working with vulnerable populations, or if he was ever investigated for domestic violence, the authorities would have a record of his history. It's been 5 years since that night, and my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. I graduated from Washington State with a degree in psychology, inspired by my own experience with abuse and manipulation. I now work as a counselor specializing in family trauma and sibling abuse, helping other men who have lived through similar experiences. The work is challenging but incredibly rewarding. I've helped dozens of families recognize and address abusive dynamics, and I've seen the power of speaking truth to injustice over and over again. Every client who finds their voice, every family that chooses healing over denial, feels like a small victory against the forces that kept me silent for so many years. One thing I've learned in my work is that male victims of sibling abuse face unique challenges. Society often dismisses abuse between brothers as normal roughhousing, or tells boys they should be able to defend themselves. I've worked with grown men who still blame themselves for not fighting back against older, stronger siblings, not understanding that abuse is about power and control, not just physical strength. My relationship with my parents has been complicated. They eventually admitted that they had failed me as a child. They had been so blinded by Marcus's charisma and achievements that they had completely ignored the signs of abuse. My mother went to therapy to deal with her guilt and denial, and my father has tried to make amends by supporting me financially through graduate school, but forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Still working through my anger about the years of neglect and dismissal. There are days when I can have a normal conversation with my parents, and there are days when I can barely look at them without feeling furious about everything they let Marcus get away with. The hardest part has been learning to trust my own perceptions again. After years of being told that I was overreacting, that I was too sensitive, that I was imagining things, I had to rebuild my confidence in my own reality. Therapy helped. But it was a long process of learning to trust myself again. My mother has struggled the most with the aftermath. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting me, for being so invested in Marcus's success that she missed her son's pain. She's been in therapy for 3 years now, and she's made significant progress. But she still carries enormous guilt about her role in enabling Marcus's abuse. My father, true to his analytical nature, initially tried to understand the situation. Logically, he wanted to know exactly how he had missed the signs, what he could have done differently, how he could prevent something like this from happening again. But eventually he had to confront the emotional reality of what his favoritism had cost his family. I was so proud of Marcus, he told me during one of our therapy sessions together. He was everything I had wanted to be as a young man, popular, athletic, successful. I think I lived vicariously through him, and I lost sight of what was happening. To you, the hardest conversation we ever had was when I asked him directly, if I had come to you with this evidence when I was younger, would you have believed me? He was quiet for a long time before answering. I don't know, he said finally. I want to say yes, but honestly, I don't know if I would have been ready to see Marcus for who he really was. Not that's something I have to live with for the rest of my life. Marcus, on the other hand, has completely cut contact with the family. He finished community college and moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where he's been working a series of dead-end jobs. He still believes that I'm the villain in this story, that I destroyed his life out of jealousy and spite. About 2 years ago, violated his probation by contacting me through a fake social media account. He sent me a series of messages that ranged from attempts at manipulation, I've changed, I'm sorry, can we talk, to outright threats, you've ruined my life, someday you'll pay for it. I immediately reported the contact to his probation officer, and Marcus was arrested for violating the terms of his probation. He spent 6 months in jail, and when he was released, he was required to move even further away and have no contact with anyone from our family. The incident reminded me that Marcus hasn't really changed. He's just learned to be more careful about how he expresses his true nature. The therapy and anger management classes were just another performance for him, another way to manipulate the system and avoid real consequences. But I've changed. The frightened, powerless boy who used to hide in his room and accept abuse as normal is gone. In his place is someone who knows his worth, who trusts his instincts, who refuses to be silenced or diminished by anyone. The most important lesson I've learned is that healing isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It's about reclaiming your power, your voice, and your right to live without fear. It's about breaking the cycle of silence that allows abuse to continue. I've also learned that abusers rely on more than just physical violence to maintain control. They use emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and social dynamics to keep their victims isolated and helpless. Marcus was a master of these techniques, and it took me years to understand just how sophisticated his manipulation had been. The evidence I gathered didn't just prove that Marcus was abusive, proved that I wasn't crazy, that my memories were real, that my pain was valid. That validation was almost as important as the justice itself. Sometimes people ask me if I regret destroying Marcus's life and breaking up my family. The answer is complicated. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Marcus chose to be an abuser rather than a brother. I regret that my parents chose to enable him rather than protect me. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret telling the truth. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, please know that you're not alone. Sibling abuse is real, and it's more common than people think. Just because someone is your family doesn't mean they have the right to hurt you. And just because other people can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. This is especially important for men to hear. Society often tells us that we should be able to handle physical confrontation, that we should fight back, that being victimized somehow makes us weak. That's not true. Abuse is about power and control, not physical strength. Dude, being victimized doesn't make you weak surviving, it makes you strong. Start documenting everything. Take photos, save messages, keep a journal. You don't have to have a plan for what you'll do with the evidence, but having it gives you options. It gives you power. And someday, when you're ready, it gives you the truth. Don't wait for permission to protect yourself. Don't wait for someone else to validate your experience. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that you deserve to live without fear. My name is Dylan Carter, and I'm no longer the forgotten son. I'm the survivor who refused to stay silent, the advocate who helps others find their voice, and the man who proved that the truth really can set you free. The little boy who used to hide in his room, to accept abuse as normal, is gone. In his place is someone who knows his worth, who trusts his instincts, and who will never again allow anyone to make him feel small or powerless. And that, more than any revenge or justice, is the real victory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.